Greetings and salutations, future diplomats. Here we are once again for our English class, which focuses on the TPS exercises, or the first phase exercises, which, as you all know, consists of true or false questions. And in this case, this week's exercise list, which is our exercise list number 2, we will be focusing on the controversial, I would say, question of 2015. The question, actually 3 questions, which were based on a excerpt from the book Orlando by Virginia Woolf, which might be tough for some candidates, as it requires you to have a extensive knowledge of English as well as some literature background in English, which makes it even harder for you to do an exam like this, which is very pressed for time. And also this year, 2015, the exam had 14 questions, had 13 questions and 3 to 4 texts in the exam, which was very hard. And texts which were more, some were extensive, like this one, like the Virginia Woolf text, and some were a bit shorter, but even so, it was far too much for the time that they allotted for you, which made it very tricky and also made you rush and made it almost impossible to answer some of the questions. So this year around, as you know, they reduced the exam to 9 questions, but still the texts have the same level of difficulty as in 2015. Only that you have less questions to answer, which in the same time that you had, 30 minutes less than the years before, which is still kind of tricky. But this week I decided to start with this question because for the past 10 years, I would say this one was one of the hardest ones, just because of the vocabulary, the language, and also the background in English modernist literature that you needed to have in order to answer this question properly, which makes this exam head and shoulders above any other English exam that you might take, even in English-specific exams such as TOEFL or IELTS and other these English language assessment tests. As I said last class, this exam will test not only your grammar skills, not only your reading and writing skills, but also your cultural background. And this is one of the cases. The questions 1 through 3 in this list tests exactly that. And it shows me also another thing. It shows me that you have to take the CACD test, the English CACD test, as a very unique, separate test from many other tests, even any other government tests, even other government examinations, because you can clearly see the influence of the examining board, of the person, of the professor who is writing these questions. In other exams, you see it's very standardized. You see, like, if you do an exam for the CESP examining board, questions are pretty much standardized. They do these questions in committee, as you would see, and there's a lot of influence from the institution CESP in the exam. Another examining boards like ISAFI and Fundação Carlos Chagas, pretty much the same thing as well. It's very standardized. For the CACD, no. It really depends on who the examiner is. I noticed that there's a lot of autonomy given to the examiners. And most of the examiners are either from UNB or from the Instituto Rio Branco themselves, or career diplomats as well. In English, there's always a mix of career diplomats and of UNB professors and Instituto Rio Branco teachers in this exam. In English, in this case, as it has been the case for the last 3 years since we had an idea, usually the person who writes this first phase exam is the UNB professor. So you would see a lot of, as I said last class, you see a lot of literary questions based on books and based on literature books, and some questions based on linguistic academic texts. And this surely was one of the cases. Even specifically Virginia Woolf, which curiously enough was the thesis of the professor who was in the examining board that year, and he's back this year as well. He was back in 2017, and he might be back in 2018. He specialized in Virginia Woolf for his master's degree, and surely enough, the first year he got back in 2015 to the exam, there was a question based on Orlando, which is considered by many to be one of Virginia Woolf's most popular books, and even more accessible books, because Virginia Woolf, sometimes she writes she used to write, she's not alive anymore, she wrote in stream of consciousness narratives, which were difficult to understand exactly who was saying what and who was speaking what, and with very colorful language. And Virginia Woolf is one of the more traditional books, one of the seminal books of the English modernist movement. It was written in the late 1920s. And so to people who study Virginia Woolf, it's one of the more accessible books. But being more accessible does not mean it's easy at all, by far. So if you don't have any idea, never read a Virginia Woolf book, you're not familiar with English modernism literature, it's going to be difficult to decipher these excerpts, especially in 30 minutes usually. That was the time we have to do for this exam. So it's quite the challenge, but we're here to help you exactly with that. So let's get going with our first question here. Let me share the screen with you guys. Hopefully all of you already have completed this exercise, so I won't have to read this excerpt here, which is quite a long one. It's almost a page long in Microsoft Word, so you can imagine the amount of time just to read the text and to understand it and to take the vocabulary in. And this is quite the challenge, I won't lie to you. But it's something that you have to practice. So that's why I would recommend that all of you may read at least one English literature book in the course of your studies here. I know it's difficult to predict what kind of book they're going to ask or what sort of questions they're going to ask next year, but it's always good to have some literature books so you can develop that vocabulary. Always read one classic literature book, and always write down any word that you don't know, use a dictionary, and just let these words gradually be assimilated into your vocabulary. So once you see it, it's going to be easier to understand it, and it's going to be faster in doing these questions and in reading interpretation. So it's pretty important that you always exercise your English skills. So just take a day, read an English book, an English literature book that has nothing to do with the exam itself, with other subjects or anything else. Just a pure literature book to take. Read it over a weekend or something. Just periodically keep reading these sort of literature books, which will develop your vocabulary. And this type of vocabulary is tested, as we see here, in the exam, in the first phase, in the TPS. Okay? All right, so this little excerpt is from Virginia Woolf's book, Orlando, a biography, which is a semi-biographical book because she uses the main character, Orlando, here as a representation of one of her greatest friends, which I forget her name, but she was also an author. This book metaphorically, symbolically retreads her life. Oops, sorry here. Retreads her life, and then also at the same time retreads some instances and some episodes in British history as well. So, and you have to have a lot of cultural background to fully understand what she's writing here. But at the same time, as we're going to see in the question, sometimes if you have too much knowledge of this book, it might it might actually harm you. It might actually make it harder for you to understand, because they try to trick you exactly with this, with the knowledge that you might have from somewhere else. So if you're not paying attention, you might get it wrong, even if you know the book beforehand. Okay, and I'll show you here as we go through the questions how that could happen. All right. So this first question, based off of the 2015 exam, question 1. Let's read. According to the text, decide whether the following statements are right or wrong. All right. First one. Lunging, plunging, and slicing the air with a blade were activities with which Orlando engaged, as well as engaged as some sort of rehearsal for the roles he believed he would eventually play. So this one, of course, here they're testing 1, your vocabulary, and 2, your reading comprehension. So they're testing 2 things at once, just with one little question. The lunging and plunging and slicing with the air and the blade, they're testing if you know what these actions mean. Okay, so when he says, you guys might know this already, but lunging means he was with a blade or with a sword, and he was pretending to lunge at somebody, to attack somebody, to lunge his blade. Also plunging, he was plunging the blade, went down, and slicing through the air. So these motions with a blade. And these is correct. These activities he was doing because if you read back here in the text, he was trying to imitate his father or his grandfather, who were noblemen who traveled all through the world in these adventures. But Orlando was 16 at the time. He was too young to go on these adventures. So he would get the blade and would go to his attic and pretend he was doing it exactly like his father or grandfather went through these adventures abroad. So this one is quite correct. So this one, if you knew the vocabulary, you don't even have to know the vocabulary, because it's pretty much paraphrasing what is said here. It was just testing your reading comprehension. And this one is correct. He was indeed rehearsing, sort of, for the life that he would lead. Because if you know the story behind Orlando comes from a noble family in the Elizabethan times, which is the early 16th century, if my memory does not fail me. So they were grooming him to become a nobleman. Exactly. But then if you read the book, you find out something different, which I'm going to tell you about now in the second item that we have here, the second question. So here they were definitely trying to confuse you. Orlando acquired from an early age on a disconcerting habit of cross-dressing. Okay, nowhere around here does it say he was cross-dressing. Of course, here they show that he was dressed in all pomp and pompous clothes and everything, but that was a kind of clothes that noblemen used to wear back then. So he wasn't trying to become a woman at that time, curiously enough. He was just wearing what most of the noblemen at that time in England used to wear. So in no way was he cross-dressing. But if you knew the story of the book, you would know that when he turned 30, he woke up as a woman. And that was one of the twists of the book. So if you knew the book, sort of, and you didn't understand this excerpt a little bit, you could think, oh yeah, later on in the book, he does turn into a woman all of a sudden when he turns 30. So this might be correct. So then you will be inclined to write correct when it's not. It doesn't say anywhere there that he from an early age on acquired a disconcerting habit of cross-dressing. So here the examining board even added the from an early age on, so they will leave no doubt that is incorrect, because from an early age on, no. Because if they left this out, they might argue, oh, but later on in the book, he turns into a woman. But here, no, at an early age, no. Only turns later into a book. And here also, in this excerpt, just by the excerpt alone, you cannot tell that he will become a woman later on. Okay, so this one is incorrect. All right. Three, one could find some live animals up in the attic of Orlando's house. Live animals? No. Here also they're trying to confuse you because there's a lot of imageries that they use of animals, of the animals that that his father, his grandfather brought back from his adventures, but they're not live animals. They're mostly they are they are the carcasses of animals or heads of animals and uh, stuffed heads of animals and stuff. They're not live. So this one is completely just testing your reading comprehension. This one is a bit easier, I would say. And no, they were not bringing in live animals to his attic. Okay. All right. Here, yeah, they were confusing him exactly with this sentence here. Orlando stood now in the midst of the yellow body of a heraldic leopard. Uh, of course, there were stuffed leopards there and the other sorts of animals that they brought from their adventures, but here it does not say there were live animals there. He might be pretending they were alive to pretend that he was in one of those adventures, but no, they weren't necessarily alive in the attic. It also would not make sense. This is another thing that you have to really pay attention. Some of their questions, some of their propositions do not make sense, do not make logical sense. So you don't even have to go back to the text and say, why would this kid be with live animals in an attic in the middle of England? That would not make any sense. So sometimes just by logic, you can deduce that their proposition is incorrect. Okay. All right. 4. 4, it was basically testing your vocabulary, basically. Orlando cut a striking figure. And this one, they were testing if you knew the expression cut a striking figure. And also they were trying to confuse you with the slicing that he did with the blade. So I think they were trying to confuse you with the slicing and the cut. Here. And the expression to cut a striking figure means that oh, excuse me, I should stop sharing. Oh, there we go, we're back. I think we're back. Just 1 second. Oh. Stop here, let's share the screen again. All right, there we go. Sorry here, we're having some technical difficulties. I'll be right back. Okay, as always, I was saying, to cut a striking figure, that expression means that you cause admiration in others with your appearance. You might have when they say somebody has a striking figure, means that you basically have beautiful face, beautiful body. You cause admiration in other people with your figure, meaning your body. All right. So when somebody says you cut a striking figure, means that you cause admirations because of your appearance to other people. Okay. All right. So that's why they were confusing with the cut motion. Here you can see that the author does indeed try to present Orlando, yes, as a striking figure. If you read this passage here, Orlando, to look at, was cut out precisely for some such career. Then she starts describing his physical appearance, which she's almost flattering him. Like the red of the cheeks was covered with peach down, fuzzy stubble here it's before you have a beard. Teenagers do have that. It's almost like peach hairs. It's not quite a beard yet, but the beard is starting to grow. That's why it's she uses this metaphor of the peach. The down of the lips was only a little thinner than the down of the cheeks. These lips themselves were short and slightly drawn back over the teeth, of an exquisite and almond whiteness. So by the language that she uses, you can see that Virginia Woolf was trying to paint him, Orlando, as a striking figure. So this one is correct, right? Again, so far we have this mix of vocabulary and reading comprehension here. If you have a longer time to analyze the text, it's actually not that hard. It's hard, of course, during testing situations, which is a very unique time to be in. So it's difficult to analyze it then. But once you take a step back and look at the exam, you see it's not that impossible. Okay. Question number 2. In relation to Orlando's family here, so they specify the scope of the question. Decide whether the following statements are right or wrong. Number 1, Orlando's family have enjoyed their title from time immemorial. That is correct. If you see, reading the text, you'll see that they are a noble family, and they have, since they're noble, they have since time immemorial, or since nobody can pinpoint the exact time when they became noble, when they have money. They have enjoyed their title of nobility. So it's not actually pinpointed in the past. So since time immemorial, and this is somewhat covered in the text. There you can gather from this excerpt that they do have. Okay, so you can clearly see this when here Virginia Woolf says in this excerpt here that his father had been noble since they had been at all. So since they existed, so since time immemorial, there's no way to pinpoint exactly when they became noble. So for a long time, they have been noble. Okay. Now moving on, because we're a little pressed for time here.